Hey guys, picked up a new disc a couple weeks back and want to share my experience with you. Hopefully this is helpful and you can see how the disc flies in general and whether or not it would be something you could potentially fit in your bag. The reason I really looked into it first was that I I really like to throw understable discs, particularly for drivers, and I just had a hole in my bag that I have a few super overstable 4-time Star Destroyers that are just not really usable and nothing quite in between, particularly on that hole that you just saw. You need a disc to fly pretty straight and then hook up left. It's easy to throw it really hard and then have a disc flip to your right, and that's not very helpful. So I needed something to fill that job. So I had talked to some people in disc golf course review and had some great suggestions. I really liked the suggestion of the Pharaoh when I saw it. So I looked into it. I ended up getting the swirly S-blend plastic, which is what they did for the first 2 runs. The third run is a I blend, I believe, and is a little less stable. The numbers on it are 13, 6, -2, and 2. And I think in general those numbers are pretty accurate. We'll talk about a couple of variations there, but overall it's pretty good. This disc is made by Infiinite discs. They started making their own discs about 3 years, or not 3 years ago, last year. I know they started out with a mid-range of fairway driver and this distance driver. I'm not sure who makes them, but I don't know if they make them themselves or if they have someone else manufacture them. But pretty interesting disc, and want to show you some flights here in some different holes and in the field so you can get a sense of how it flies. So here we go. This first hole has that pin straight ahead, but there's a big drop off to the left. So sometimes it's nice to throw a little hyzer out there so you take that out of play. What you can see here is if you power down on this disc, it'll hold that line really nicely and not flip up totally on you and ride left. But what's nice is that it doesn't dump left on you. It'll hold it for a while before it really starts moving left, so you can get some good distance out of it even if you don't really throw it super hard. This is the same day. I'm a little bit tired at this point, but nice little smooth throw. You can see it wants to ride just a tiny bit to the right and then finish to the left. That's what I really liked, and that's what I was looking for in a disc, something that you could get to ride flat for a little while, get some distance out of it, particularly if you put some power in it since it's a 13 speed, but something that'll finish left. And right out of the box, that's exactly what it does. You can see just sort of a little flip up, almost baby anhyzer there, baby flex, and then finishes left ultimately, but not too far left. So this is a shot coming at the camera. It looks surprisingly similar, but it's actually a different shot. You can see here again, it rides a little bit right and then finishes left. I really like how it's got that low fade. I think that 2 fade is pretty accurate. That, you know, it's not something you want to be throwing where you're trying to get a hard finish to the left, but it's something that you can get to go straight. It's going to stay fairly straight, particularly for a 13 speed. That's kind of impressive in my mind. So I really liked it for that sense. You'll find in a couple of the later videos that some of this flight changes a little bit, but you can see nice flight to it there. This is the hole that made me realize I needed a disc like this. The basket is sort of right in line with where the disc ends, but further up the hill. There's a gap off to the left clearly, which makes you want to throw a flex shot, but there's some branches in the way that make it really not an option. So what the play, I think, is throwing right at the gap that this is flying at and let it finish to the left. So I just didn't have a disc that would do that. I would typically throw the Shrike at a hyzer, try to go for the hyzer flip up, but with some power it was easy to flip it up too much and have it ride to the right. It just wasn't accurate enough on a shot like this where you really wanted it to go straight for a while and then have sort of a subtle finish at the end, which is exactly what this would do. So this is, again, pretty soon after I got the disc, maybe a week or 2 after I'd gotten it. So it really had this nice flight with a slight subtle turn to the right, and then you can see sort of diving to the left there at the end, but again, not excessively. This is a few weeks later. You can tell by the grass, obviously, but I've beaten in the disc for a few weeks, and a little hyzer flip, nice and smooth, not a lot of power, but it still wants to ride to the right, but then finish left on this uphill shot. This is one of my favorite holes to play. The basket sits underneath that outcropping of trees there at the end, straight ahead. There's often a headwind coming at us, and this is again a good disc for that because I would used to love to throw my Shrike. But the problem with that is that if you can't feel the headwind sometimes because the tee pad is sort of encompassed by some woods, and you get the Shrike out there, even with the hyzer flip, and if you get it into the headwind, it'll just hold right, hold right, hold right, and won't ever fully come out of it soon enough. Something like this, I'm hoping if you can throw a hyzer or throw it flatter with some power, that it'll flip up, but it won't dive to the right. It'll at least finish left. There's some room off to the left, so that's not a bad miss ultimately. You can see I've beaten in the disc quite a bit over the few weeks, and even though there was actually a slight tailwind this day, the disc wanted to move to the right. It ultimately came out of it relatively quickly, but maybe a little bit more than it would have those first couple weeks I had the disc. I took this shot for a couple reasons. You can tell it's early in the season, my form's pretty sloppy, particularly keeping the nose angle the same angle as I'm reaching back. I'm kind of tipping the nose angle down and then flipping up as I'm coming through to compensate a few other things that I'm doing that I need to work on. And also to give you the context that I typically will throw the disc on a drive between 400 450. That downhill shot I showed you a moment ago is a 600-foot shot with a good powerful shot. I've gotten this actual disc to the edge of circle one. Obviously it's downhill, so that's different, but I wanted to give you an idea if I kind of power down a little bit after it's been beaten in a little bit, how it's going to fly. If, say, you throw it not quite as far, how it's going to fly. So I throw it that hyzer, trying to keep that angle a little bit more consistent. It flips up a little bit, just glides straight. It doesn't really move to the right, and it finishes softly to the left. Still not a hard finish left, even if you don't put full power on it, which is really nice. It's a forgiving disc. I really want to point that out, that it can really do a lot of different things because you can't make a lot of mistakes. If you throw it with a slight hyzer or a flat shot, it's not going to die on you to the left like a really overstable beefy disc would. And it's also really not going to dive to the right unless you put a huge amount of power or have a strong headwind. And I did see that several times. I played a couple of rounds in some strong headwinds, and I had trouble throwing it flat with a lot of headwind. It did dive to the right. Didn't necessarily dive into the ground, but it held that flex line and hyzer line to the right and didn't finish left as much in that headwind. This is a really fun shot. You can see the normal tee pad off to the left, and I'm throwing from the tee pad they usually use for the A tier during the summer. The hole is a out of bounds carry for about 300, 350 feet typically, and I'm 100, 150 feet back behind that. You really want a straight shot. The basket is off to the left, but there's also out of bounds to the left, so you're not really trying to get it close to the basket. You're trying to lay it up dead straight so that you have a nice approach shot for that. So I'm throwing it pretty hard just because you really got to get it over the out of bounds. When I had first gotten this disc, this would have flipped up a little bit, held straight for a while, then had a subtle fade to the left. You can see here it flips up, but it really dived to the right. There's often a headwind, which would have explained it, but there's no headwind on this day that would have caused that. So it definitely, the flight changed as you beat it in. It's purported to be like a star plastic, and that's exactly what it feels like in your hand. But I found it really beat in a lot quicker than I would have expected. I certainly used it quite a bit, but I got this maybe only 4 or 5 weeks prior to this shot. So it's not like I've spent a year or two beating it in. It's been in a relatively short period of time in relation to other star plastic discs. I still really use it a lot and I like it. I can trust it in a slight headwind. I can definitely expect it to fly straighter than my Shrike. It's not going to flip up and ride to the right quite as much if I don't put 100% power into it. Still really good disc, but if you throw over 450, 500, expect this to flip up on you if you're throwing it hard or into the headwind once you've beaten it in. I got this disc for backhand purposes, but once I started throwing it forehand a little bit, I was shocked by how far I could go. I started playing disc golf throwing only forehands. I started with a Valkyrie, my first disc ever. Then I threw a Boss, and I've thrown a Destroyer mainly for my backhands up until now. And I was just shocked by how far this one went. It definitely went farther than all those, noticeably. It can really hold a nice anhyzer. You can see here in this shot, I think I got a little bit of off-axis torque on it, which is why it wants to move to the left too much. But a lot of the time, it'll hold to that little anhyzer line, not dive in, and then it'll flex out of it, really get a lot of distance out of it. So I really love this for the forehand. I wasn't expecting it, particularly with all the dome. I like a lot of flatter discs for the forehand, but I was super surprised on how far this disc could go. A couple of holes that I always had trouble quite reaching, getting enough power on with the forehand, I found I could do with ease with this disc, and I didn't have to throw it super hard. It was more about throwing it smooth and letting the disc do the work. So definitely would recommend it for forehand discs. I think you'd be surprised. Here's a good practical example of that. This is an uphill shot. It's more uphill than it really looks, but it's not very far. And I always had trouble getting it quite there with some of those other discs I was talking about. I would have to throw it 100%, which is really making it hard to hit the line. Where you can see here, I'm just throwing a nice smooth shot, and it actually goes farther than those other discs when I was throwing 100%. I can throw it at a nice little slight hyzer to hold straight for a while so I hit the gap and then finish right exactly how you want it. So I really recommend this for anyone who's a forehand thrower. I think you can get a lot of distance out of it. You can use it for a lot of different shapes, be creative with it, and it can be very reliable. Definitely one of my favorite discs for forehand. Here's a view of the disc. You can see quite a few scrapes, some dings in the disc. You'll see from the side view there's a couple of gouges in it. After only having it for a few weeks, I was pretty surprised on how quickly it beat in. For it being sort of star plastic like, I thought it was going to beat in a bit slower, but the flight definitely changed over that period of time and the disc wore more than expected. I loved it out of the box. I still really like it now. The flight definitely is different. I'm kind of considering maybe getting a second one to have a different flight to it. You can see really nice stamp on the disc, pretty cool looking disc. I would really recommend it. Both forehand, backhand, you can have a lot of uses for this disc. So check out this disc, maybe even pick up the Double G signature version. But whether you throw 350 or you throw 500, I honestly think this disc has a place in your bag. It's just fun to throw, and you won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching. If you have any feedback, please let me know, and hopefully some more videos to come soon.